All right. Well, it is now officially official. Ross Hodge is West Virginia's 24th men's basketball head coach. He has been introduced. He has been shaking hands. He has been kissing babies. He has been attending the backyard brawl, a big win for the Mountaineers over Pitt. And he is now immersed in the West Virginia Mountaineers community. Ren Baker introduced him. He talked for a while. We got to ask questions. And now we're going to discuss what we just experienced earlier today and maybe chat with you fans. Once again, Mike Asti here. I'm joined by Cody Nespor, of course. This is another edition of Mountaineer Report here on WV Sports Now, West Virginia Sports Now. And Cody, he's the guy. And obviously, when he was initially announced, which is a week ago now, because he did coach the rest of North Texas's run through the NIT, and he even talked a little bit about that decision in the presser. There was a polarizing reaction, to say the very, very least. He was not who alums wanted. He was not who the donors wanted. I can definitely confirm that. They even voiced that through myself and other colleagues, including one of your former colleagues. Right after the announcement, they made it very clear, hey, be our conduit. We don't want this guy. Didn't appear to be that vibe at the press conference, though. I know there were some donors there. They were shaking his hand. They seemed very happy. They were talking to the family. And I feel like he won the presser and maybe won some fans over. Even the poll we put up on the site prior to the presser, it looks like the fans are turning the corner a little bit. So before we fully unpack everything that happened at his introductory press conference, do you think Ross Hodge picked up his first W as West Virginia's head coach and as a Mountaineer? And why do you think he won the press conference? And maybe we're experiencing a changing of tune here. Even myself, honestly, I've calmed down and I went from ranting, probably being the toughest on this of anybody covering the coaching search, to I can't say I'm fully sold, but I do think he won the press conference.
Yeah, I think, I think it as soon as he actually got to town and got to talking, I thought people would, I didn't know much about him, but I had looked up his old press conferences, and he, he's a good orator. He seemed very personal. So I always kind of thought as soon as he got to town and got to talking, people would kind of relax a little bit. And it's that kind of, I think the initial reaction was so
it was a lot
driven by like surprise, right? Because it was kind of like his name was floated, in like a day or two later, it was confirmed he was the guy. I think a lot of it was surprise, and a lot of it was reaction to other coaching moves that had been made around the country that people wanted. Right. And so I thought, in hindsight, it kind of makes sense. This was always going to be a move that was that kind of needed probably a little bit of space to breathe and let people warm up to. And I agree with you. I thought he was very, very good today. He played, obviously it wasn't open to the public, but he played very well in the room to whatever, assortment of stakeholders were in there, donors, board of governors, so on and so forth.
And it was streamed to the globe, and they don't do that for every press conference. And if you just look at the comments, and I hate doing this, but if you look at the Facebook comments, the social media comments off WVU's stream itself, way more positive than after the initial announcement. The initial announcement, I believe they shut off the comments on the Facebook because it was almost 100% negative. And that was not the case with the press conference and the live stream.
Yeah, and I think, again, that doesn't super surprise me. I think, because he and it showed today, like, he's not an impersonal guy. He's not he's not one of these coaches that like has trouble talking to a crowd, or like, obviously, like we saw it today. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that people see that, and it sways them, right? Or it just changes their mind, this might be weird to say, but I think maybe the week in between the announcement and having this helped a little bit.
It was a blessing in disguise. I get it was for him wanting to finish with North Texas, but if you had a press conference the next day, I honestly think the questions from the media would have been I mean, we asked tough questions. I know I did, but
Yeah.
I think it would
Yeah.
even have been a different vibe because there were a lot of us in media that it looked like it was him from that Monday on. But I mean, the best of us was not hitting this on the head like maybe we were in the football search. So I think it would have just been a different vibe. The fans were very angry. I don't even know if the donors would have been there because, again, I can tell you from my donor sources, they were not happy after the announcement. And I'm not the only person that reported that, but there were some donors, and I will tell you, some of them are people I talked to, and they looked fine today. So maybe they needed that week cooling off period because they clearly, as you know, Cody, if a donor's hitting up a media member and saying, please voice my anger, they are actually 10 times angrier than that.
Mhm.
And that clearly got calmed down. So maybe it was a blessing in disguise. And maybe that was part of Ren giving a wink. Like, I'm sure he loved to finish the job with your team. Ren said that made him want Ross Hodge more, and it was a respectful thing to do. And it turned out he was still doing portal work, which is good. But it wasn't 100% West Virginia work that maybe you would prefer, but maybe Ren saw the reaction because that announcement was hours later. Maybe he like winked to himself, "Now we need a break. Like, let's just go do that." And then we'll, so it maybe did work out best for everybody that there was that week off because no other coaching announcement from any other program, certainly not power programs, had any kind of break. I mean, Maryland had a job open, a quick search, a guy wanted a job, and then less than 24 hours later, they have a press conference. West Virginia dragged out a search when it appeared it was always going to be one guy, and then they drag out a press conference, but it does appear it worked out.
Was Maryland's job open and closed in between Hodge getting announced and being introduced?
So no, Hodge was announced, but no, because I did another national show that this was discussed with a colleague that covers Maryland. So Hodge was announced. We knew he was the coach before Maryland had their search open. So it wasn't, but it was Maryland was a very quick thing. There already were reports that Buzz Williams wanted the job right around the time Hodge was announced. So the overall time of Ren Baker's 8-day search from when his job was open a week and a half before when Kevin Willard was still dealing with his drama. If you're talking about the two, and the reason why they're compared, the two controversial national stories of two coaches screwing over a program were Darren DeVries and Ken Willard, and different scenarios, of course. But DeVries was first, and then they got Hodge. And it almost is part of why I had my reaction because they didn't even let the other jobs play out. They hired a guy with little experience, unlike Maryland getting plucking a power 4, which is different than they did with Willard. You could argue the Maryland's job is a little better, but history-wise, it's kind of close. Like, it looks on overall resume, they got a much worse guy, which I think is why the anger was there from the donors who did kick in more money, and then they get a worse guy resume-wise than even a year ago. That's going back to the rant from a couple of shows ago, but that vibe did not feel like that carried over to this press conference, is the point.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Like, I even on just kind of browsing social media, you mentioned the Facebook comments, which probably aren't the best indicator.
Fire. Don't go there. Don't go there.
But even just browsing social media today, there, when it was announced, social media was I mean, more or less up in arms. And today, it does seem like the majority of people, or at least the majority of people with a big enough platform that I see them,
you're right. Yeah,
have turned around on it. And again, that doesn't super surprise me. Like I said, it's felt like a move that was going to take some warming up to. I guess I am a little bit surprised it kind of happened so naturally, right? Because I think, like you said, absolute blessing in disguise. Just that intervening week, people learning more about him. People, certainly all the quotes from third parties that WVU has shared.
That helped too, but I wasn't buying.
I think it's definitely
why they were trying to do that. But that was even brought up during the presser that, hey, Dusty May approves this coach. We heard that even during the presser.
Well, I think that was a good bit of PR if you're going to hire a coach that the vast majority of your fan base doesn't know his name, to come out with, hey, here's all these people whose name talking
it was
about
on
how good
purpose.
This guy is.
Right.
Yeah,
it was
so
on purpose.
A good and really effective bit of PR by the university. And it's weird to say a blessing in disguise that he didn't work here for a week, right? That he was announced, and then it took a week for him to get here, because it just gave everybody time to cool off and kind of maybe open up more to the idea and I still think being able to watch him coach a couple days
Oh,
ago
yeah.
probably went a long way too.
Yeah, despite losing, he coached
Yeah,
his butt off. I mean, that and
yeah.
defensively, which we'll get into too, and he brought up a lot about that being the recipe to win a Big 12, and that's been seen with recent champions. That was very evident in that game. They didn't have enough offense, which again is the concern, and I'm going to bring that up constantly covering this because I feel like that's an undertone that was like the one thing that was never brought up because you
Yeah.
could argue, Cody, defense was not DeVries' problem, but only won 19 games and missed out on the tournament. They had a good defense there as well, not enough offense. So that will get brought up and be a concern still. But he did hit the nail on the head of, I have a plan. I think he answered questions well. I flat out asked him, in a way, your resume doesn't garner this job. This job, even what Ren always talks about, is bigger than what your resume would suggest. This can't be a rebuild for years on end. This cannot be a trust to climb type of thing. I didn't say this literally, but that was how I asked it. And what do you say to those who say you're not ready for this? Can you win right away? And he seemed kind of ready for that question. So maybe also Ren, he knows Ross so well from their North Texas connection. Maybe Ren also knew, okay, he's not dumb. This might have a polarizing reaction. This is not the attractive hire. This is not the splash hire that Darren DeVries was. Because if you remember, after a year of drama and a horrible season for the program, the response to DeVries being hired, who now everyone hates, was overwhelmingly positive. It was, wow, we didn't think we could ever get Dusty May, but the next guy, or, right up there, him and Kelsey, we got one of them. And DeVries picked us over other power jobs. That was out there nationally. That's a big feather in our cap. And then Ren bragged about it. And you had a press conference at the Coliseum, fireworks, fans. And I do want to compare those presses because I think that also sets the vibe here for the two men who did and now will coach, and the two men involved with this program in this past year. But I think Ren maybe knew, okay, that was that last year. This won't give you that overwhelming positive reaction, but Ross is more my guy. If I got to have a guy that's going to kind of save the day from drama, who won't give me any drama, who I have no concerns character-wise with, who I do think is maybe ready for this job, who is one hell of a coach, who I do know personally, who's not going to screw me over and have backdoor meetings. There's not going to be collusion going on. He likely isn't even going to leave after 1 year anyway, because he talked about that being an emotional move for his family. I cannot imagine him moving his kid. Certainly at that point, he'd be doing it to his daughter in senior year of high school. Again, maybe Ren just thought to himself, I will sacrifice a little bit of the splashness of a hire and maybe elevate somebody that you talked about in our last show, maybe elevate somebody one tick of a year earlier than maybe the fans would prefer without him having an NCAA tournament appearance on his resume. And I will do it because of trust in him. I trust he'll win the presser. I trust he'll win the fans over. I trust he'll be able to win enough games, and just a lot of trust of Ren. And when you think about it, Cody, and I did sit back and think about this over the last week, if I was in a situation where I am running a company, like running this site, running this network, or anyone running any type of company, and you continuously swing and miss with hires, you have drama one after the other, maybe eventually you just go, I'm calling my friend, dig me out of this mess. Like, maybe that's kind of what Ren did, and it is a risk, because if Ross goes in there and loses, and this is a Neil Brown repeat, and it got to be a trust the climb thing, the fans cannot wait. They're not going to want 3-4. I even said this. You cannot have 3-4-5 years in a row missing the NCAA tournament. I said that almost literally to what I'm saying now, and he looked me dead in the eye and made it. He made it clear he understood it, but that's not on him from the prior 2 years. But it will be if they keep missing. And maybe Ren is just confident enough that this hire will work, because you don't always have to have the splashiest hire. The longtime fans will always connect this back to John Beilein being hired. He was not a flash hire. He was not a splash hire. He was controversial. People did not want him then, and he had a great run. He built it up, had the NIT title and an Elite Eight appearance with West Virginia, and then became a Hall of Fame coach, and he's still beloved despite not finishing his career at West Virginia. So if Hodge does eventually leave and get elevated like Beilein did, maybe at least he'll have a great run at WVU, and it will be at minimum more than 1 year because tip of the cap to Hoppy Kirschable, who also started us off by literally saying the last guy didn't plant roots. How are you going to tell us you'll be here more than 1 year? Because 1 year is not going to work out for us. It's not acceptable anymore. So that was all said. Like, I think one thing I do respect of him, and I'm sure Ren, tipped him off. He knows the program. He knows the media. He knows the fans. He knows, who we are and what we're going to ask and the vibe. He may have secretly even watched some of this show. He's in tune on social media. I'm sure, he tipped Ross off, but I got to say Ross sat there with people that he didn't know at all, and he took some zingers, and he handled it well. So I do think he won the presser. Winning games and winning recruiting before that is, of course, more important.
Yeah, it's Mike, you bring up the question you asked. That was maybe when I re-listened to it, that was maybe the one answer I didn't really love from Hodge.
Okay.
Because the way I think you said, like, why do you believe you're ready for this kind of job?
Yeah, that part of it was in there.
He brought up all the coaches he had worked for previously, which is part of it. That's good. It's but I think that kind of question, you've got to talk about yourself a little bit more, which he didn't do. He didn't talk about himself. He talked about all the guys he had worked for, and that
during NCAA tournament appearances, because I even said you haven't been to an NCAA tournament. They don't want to miss 3-4 years in a row. And he basically said, I haven't been a head coach, but I went along for the ride under other great coaches, which isn't the same job.
Yeah. And when I listened back to that, I had the thought, like, well, those guys aren't here. Like, you're here, Ross.
Maybe they should be hired, right?
Why are you ready for this? And that again, it wasn't a bad answer, right? Because he didn't, he didn't shy away from it, and he gave. But that was the one where I'm like, that's maybe the time to brag about yourself a little bit more, but that really, listening back to it, that was maybe the only question where I don't think he was like just absolutely knocked it out of the park.
Well, I'm sorry. So I'm single-handedly responsible for him not getting 100%. He got an A- instead of an A+ because of my question. I feel bad, Ross.
That's not
it wasn't the plan. No. I'm just joking. But I mean, Cody, the only thing, and maybe this is a detractor who would give this response, play devil's advocate again, because you're saying you talk about yourself, brag about yourself instead of the people you worked under because they're not the coach now. And Ren, even also when he's trying to defend it, it almost appeared, Cody, that Ren was trying to. This is what Ren does. I'm sure you're aware. He lays the groundwork and tries to answer questions he thinks are coming in his introduction. So he was like, and he turned like towards our area and was like, here's the question I know Mike's going to ask. It almost felt like. But when I will come back at what Ren said and even him, and kind of what you're alluding to, it was a lot of, well, Dusty May approves. He worked under a guy who got elevated Texas Tech from North Texas, and he got a top 10 rank. So why couldn't Ross do it? Ross said, I've experienced the tournament, the bus rides, the plane rides, the meetings, the going game to game. I've experienced it. I just haven't been a head coach. It's a different vibe. You say talk about yourself more in those instances. But maybe the problem is, Cody, that if somebody flat asks you, are you ready for this big time of a job off the resume and lineage that Ren Baker always reads, which I also brought up. Ren reads the damn appearances and resume all the time, and he does it on purpose because the program's down, but he always closes by saying we're a top 20 winningest, we're a top 25 job. He wants that said, and he wants it known that is his opinion despite missing for 2 years. He says it in basketball and in football. So if that's the case, that is what's on your shoulder. It's not coming off of back-to-back misses. Ren says this is a top 25 all-time program, and they got to get in every year. So why are you ready for that? And you've not been in the NCAA tournament at all. And Cody, maybe the problem is there's nothing he can say about himself and any award, any accolade, any NCAA tournament appearance. Imagine if he would have sat there and said, I haven't been to the NCAA, but I did just clearly go to the NIT Final Four. We might have got a laugh. Everyone would be like, that's not going to work. This program turned down invites to the other minor tournaments, guy. They don't want to go to those. The Crown basketball, this program said no. And yeah, there was coaching drama, and that's part of it. But programs like West Virginia said no to the NIT a year ago. You really are now in a situation where you can't go to any other, or it's an embarrassment to the program. So that, I don't think he answered it poorly. But that, I think, is the symbolism and the embodiment of why many didn't like it initially, to be fair to the initial reaction, Cody. And as much as fans go crazy at times, and maybe I even ranted and went crazy at times, I do think the reason why it was like that initially is you have a guy who said, now there's more money. We will compete in conference and nationally because of this money. Rev share is going to help us. We're a top 25 all-time program. We got to get in the tournament every year. We should have been this past season. And then you turn around and you hire a guy who's only been a D1 coach as a head coach for 2 years. That is the embodiment of maybe that's why there's a problem. That does not connect. And it does appear Ross was always the coach. It does appear he always was the guy. Ren even said, I was going to talk about 6 coaches, but then all these guys kept saying Ross, and I basically said, forget the others, we're going to Ross. I mean, that feels like he didn't even do a search. It feels like it almost was always Ross Hodge, because the other coaches got plucked off before we knew it was going to be Ross anyway, and after people's reporting was wrong. So, again, that's the risk of this. Again, he hit a home run on this presser. I think he's a great guy. I think he's going to fit in the community. I think the fans are going to love him. They're going to want to root for him. I want him to win. I mean, he cried up there. I mean, he was emotional about the situation. And, there was even some comments of him saying, his father's passed away, but he now feels closer to him by being in almost heaven, with his dad being in heaven. And I lost my father, so I kind of can connect to that. And that's all special, but that can be a little Neil Brown vibe from the detractors. And that as great as he was, and he would say those things and send, personal letters and notes, and my grandfather passed away, I get a letter, you have your career thing. He sends you a letter in the mail. It's a great, tearjerker. Didn't win enough. Ross got to win more than winning the presser and more than winning people's emotions, which I think he did win those 2 things. Ren may trust him, but maybe the way he answered that one question of mine is the reason why there's still concern despite winning the press conference.
Yeah, and I think something else that they did really well today, which was very minor, was after the hire, when we did our show, I kind of diminished his junior college head coaching.
Yeah, he won big there. So yeah.
But I kind of said, like, that's the bare minimum of what a coach should do.
Right.
I thought they spun that very well today, and it started with Ren, where they spun that into basically saying high major basketball roster management basically is just junior college roster management now, because everybody's gone every year.
True.
And I thought that was a really good spin, very minor too, but that because I had talked about it, it stuck out to me. And just another kind of subtle, nice bit of PR work there. But you're right. I think, it's even if there were people that still are vehemently against the move or anything, I don't think anybody could say he came off today as anything other than personable, anything other than likable. Immediately seems like a very easy guy to root for.
You can't like him less. You're not being fair, right?
A very relatable guy. Like his story of his mom working 3 jobs. It's very relatable, right? For anybody whose parents, worked hard like that. And the story about his kids wanting desperately to go to the baseball game last night. And that that's very relatable. The video that they put out from that was very charming of him interacting with fans. And so it's just like I think I said on our initial show, like, you can't spin the resume. I think they've done a very good job of sort of spinning the man the last couple of days too.
Yeah, they did.
Basically saying, look past that, look past the experience, get to know this guy. And I think it's worked very well the last, like I said, 48 or so hours very effective as well.
I think it's been very, very effective, but it's been intentional. Ren Baker, Ren Baker and the West Virginia Athletic Department, and I do not mean this as an insult at all, it is a compliment, because this is what they're supposed to do from Ren on down. Michael Fragao, Mike Montoro, the whole group. They are very good at their jobs. They are very good communicators. They are very good at PR. They are very good at, I'm sure there was a meeting, Cody, at one point after Ren told everybody, and Vergale's part of the search, so he may have even known before others within the department. But once it was 100% Ross Hodge, not just 99.9, we got to cross our T's and dot our I's. Once they knew it was him, even before the announcement, certainly after, I'm sure there was another meeting, maybe even multiple, because they saw the initial reaction. And maybe they got together and was like, okay, this is being received very poorly. And based on the country, based on last year, based on everything, based on what I've said, Ren Baker's probably honest. Like, I put my foot in my mouth a little bit. Based on the situation, we got to fix. And then they get to work, and it's like they could do a political campaign. I think these guys could run for office, because this is what this is a successful campaign. This is what they did. This is what goes on. And yeah, and I do think, Cody, they got, the right fans. There was even one comment from one of the fans in one of the videos at the baseball game that I laughed a little bit, because I don't know if it was picked apart or how they found this fan. But a random fan that he didn't know came up to him and said, "Hi, I'm Ross." And they said, "Oh, I know who you are. I've been following you a while." And I'm thinking, really? Like, a West Virginia fan's been following him for a while and knows who he is? That's not what I've been seeing as the reaction. So maybe that's the case for some, but you got to be I feel like you got to be a college basketball sicko to be watching Ross Hodge a couple years ago. So I think they got lucky with some fans. They found the right fans. They probably absorbed the media content a couple days in and was like, you know what? Ren Marley was mature and was like, I believe this man can win. I believe he's ready for the job. So does Dusty May. I believe this guy will win and can do it quick. He can even do the DeVries thing, and then he will stick around. I'm sure Ren believes that in his heart of hearts, or he wouldn't put his career on the line for the hire like he did with Rich Rod, like he did with any others. These are the two hires that are his career now for his future. But at the same time, Ren's also mature in that role and was like, okay, this is the reaction, but I am not going to convince Mike, Cody, anyone in media, any fan. I'm not going to be able to convince them that this man with only 2 years of D1 head coaching, assistant coaching, and mostly junior college has a resume worthy of the job. I'm not going to convince them. So my next case of action is we're going to spin the man. We're going to highlight the man. We're going to hammer home the strategy and the gameplay, which I wanted to talk about here in a moment with defense. And we're going to accentuate that. And that's even part of it too, Cody, and that'll segue us in. Mountaineer Report here, WV Sports Now. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, as we are recapping the Ross Hodge introductory press conference. He is now the 24th head coach in the history of the men's basketball program. And we were talking about, the spin that's worked. He won the presser. The program put out the spin that he, of the man, that he's the right man for the job, more so than even the resume, which maybe is lacking for the job overall. He says he's ready. Ren says he's ready. It's still, the proof is in the pudding. But not only that, but they also accentuated his style, meaning they accentuated he's a great defensive coach. And the Ken Palm numbers say North Texas was a great defensive team, despite not being an NCAA tournament team and being in the NIT. Ren Baker said defense and the Ken Palm analytics is what we look at a lot of the time to look at how we're going to be a champion. He then corroborated and said the recent champions of this conference, the Houstons, the Kansases, even Baylor, even though they kind of did it a little different with bigs underneath. Texas Tech, when they went all the way to the championship game, it was because they were a top defensive team in the country. And then he just hammered home the Ken Palm, the defense, where you want to be, talked about Press Virginia, talked about Catlett's defensive teams, Huggins defensive teams, Beeline defensive teams. Honestly, it was all about defense. It all was, these are the great coaches in your program history. And when they won big and when they won titles, when they hung banners, they did it because of defense. And left out where their offensive ranks were. And what you also have to do offensively to marry that together. Because when Huggins went to the Final Four, great defense, tough defense, also a solid offense and players that had a legit chance to play beyond WVU. 3 out of 4 years in the Sweet 16, Deuce McBride, later on, was leading him to the NCAA tournament as a great offensive star. Javon Carter on those Sweet 16 teams. He's one of the immortals. He did it offensively, got himself to the NBA. You can go back through Huggins' career. Catlett had great defenses, but when he went to a Sweet 16, that was a team that could score enough, and he go to Beeline, and you talk about defense and what Pittsnoggle could do clamping down. The man was a revolutionary three-point sniper before his time with his size, and that team went to an Elite Eight, Cody, because of offense and the three-point shot that was before its time. But it wasn't really brought up. It was all the defense. So what's your reaction to that spin a little bit of he's great defense, let's not talk about the offensive concerns, when the success has been offense and defense and you need them both? This team just ranked as a solid defensive team with DeVries in 1 year but missed the tournament, and they only had one star player playing because Tucker only played 8 games, but they were 315th offensively in the country. You move that number down to respectability in the 200s, and they probably win a few more games than they're in the tournament. Offense has not been enough for several years. Is that still a concern? And what's your reaction to how that was handled? Because I feel like that was intentional. Let's bring up the D. Let's not bring up the offense, even the history of the program. And, people that have been following for a while can pick apart that a little bit. You got to have more offense than what they were talking about.
Yeah. I think that also had some good spin. Certainly defense is what you're going to focus on with him. But I think, I don't know. I assume it was unintentional because it would be weird to intentionally do this. But the amount of times Hodge himself, brought up Houston as an example.
Big fan of Houston. Kelvin Sampson. Yes.
I think that was again. I would struggle to call that deliberate or intentional. But I think that was a good kind of spin too of let's model ourselves after the best team in the conference right now. One of the best teams in the country over the last couple of years. I think that's if you're going to say we're going to win with defense, I think that's the perfect example to point to. Especially on this tournament run, right? They have not won games with their offense. That they've done it almost all defense, and I think that was a good, just another good bit of spin, intentional or not. And that led me. I think it was the last question of the press conference. I asked him about that, and obviously that's not a question I prepared going in. That was just something because of how many times he said it, that crawled into my brain. But no, I think that was good. It is. He did talk about how lowly ranked I think their pace is, but he still talked about we had a guy average 15 come in and he averaged 20 something.
Yeah, that was the response to the question about what about the offense. There was a question about that. Yeah.
So again, that's one of those things like just like his resume, like the offensive numbers are what they are. Like you can't change it. So, the best you can kind of do is spin. And I thought it worked well. Somebody asked him pretty directly, like, you're known for defense, but what about your offense? And he talked about it. But yeah, I think bringing up Houston was sort of the perfect response. And he did it a lot. Like I'm not really exact. He probably brought up Houston half a dozen times.
Yeah, watch it back and take a shot every time he brings up Houston. 100%, at least 5 or 6 times. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's very. And I asked him like. I can't remember how I worded my own question. I asked him something like, is for your style of play, are they just the benchmark to chase right now?
Yeah.
And he basically said, they're the benchmark everybody's going to chase.
Everyone's chasing, right? Yeah. That was a great answer because he put it, he's like, it's not just us trying to dig ourselves out of the dirt. It's everybody, and they're the top, and we're going to try to mirror them. That, I think, was a great answer. But the only thing I will say, and this goes at a little bit of your response there, because while I agree Houston has built themselves a defensive juggernaut that now could maybe win a national title and has even recently been a perennial deep tournament run team, even if they don't, when they have to win big games, Cody, they can score. So I just looked this up to corroborate what I was thinking. When you're talking about, their run has been all defense and they have definitely won with low scoring, they actually, in the recent NCAA tournament games, so 81-76 in the second round over Gonzaga. That's 81 points for a team known for defense. 69-50. Obviously, a great defensive performance. They held Tennessee to only 50 points, which is insane for an Elite Eight game against a top conference team out of the SEC this year. But they also scored 69. I'm not saying 69 is 90 points here, but 81 in the prior game. And my point is that they've done enough offensively. They are clearly a defensive team. They could shut you down and hold you to 50 or less every game, and you can be a great offensive team and can't handle them. And that's why they're a Big 12 champ. That's why, honestly, looking at the resume recently, because I wrote a national story about them, Cody, win or lose, Kelvin Sampson's a Hall of Famer. You look at that career resume. Okay. And I think it's part of this Houston run. Prior to going to Houston and even the last 5 years of what they've done, which is most of the Houston success, I don't think that would be the case with him. So it's been built on defense, but it's been enough offense when they need it. And even though they don't normally score 81, they did do it in a tournament game.
Yeah.
When's the last time West Virginia put 81 points on the board? How often do they even put 69 points on the board? So there's more offense from even Houston than I think Ross Hodge is bringing up, or even the gets in our brain off of what immediately you think of, like when you were talking, it's all defense to win. They've had big offensive games, and that's the problem with West Virginia. They haven't had enough of those in recent memory. It's been too much defense. You can't just win on defense alone, but I do think his strategy and his mentality will definitely be liked by the fan base. Because, Cody, I'll tell you this, and I think everyone can attest to this. If he's going to have a growing pains year where they're going to miss the tournament again and then have the stain of 3 years in a row of missing, and he's only going to win 16, 17 games, he's better off doing that while having a great defense, and fans can say, we are blue-collar West Virginia, and you're going to build this thing. We like you. We got to get more offense, versus losing games with 80-plus points on the board, but you're giving up 82. You got 82-80. Then the fans are going to say, that's not our style, and we're still losing. So he fits the culture and what the fans want, but you need more than just the Ross Hodge defense and that powerful defensive guru of him in order to really go far. But I do again feel like that, if he wasn't thinking this before the presser, he knows now. The expectation is, fair or not, for him to get them back in the tournament right away. And I'm not saying he has to. I could see them missing and it still being a positive year. But Ren and him continuously bring up how they feel like you can do this quicker in this era because of the transfer portal. So you keep saying that. It's the same thing that you even said with Rich Rod. I want to give you a year mulligan, but then you go in a presser and say you're going to win a national title to redeem yourself. I cover off what they say. You answer it by saying, when the transfer portal era, we can do this in 1 year. Look at the other programs that did it. Okay, they did it. You're saying it can be done. If you don't do it, why can't you do it? That's going to then be the follow-up in a year. So there is pressure there, despite, again, a win on the presser.
Yeah, it's real quick, just to do one more on defense. I looked up the Big 12 champions. There's only once in the last 13 years that a team scored over 90 points. And actually, not even 90, like 82. Once
I was going to say, what about 80? 90 is almost insane.
So Texas scored 91 in 2021. The last team to score 90 points in the Big 12 championship was Missouri. So it's been a while.
But I mean, if you score over 80, that's still, or even 75, that's more than what West Virginia is putting up, and that's more than a defensive effort. That's offense.
There's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 80s, but everything else is in the 70s.
Well, maybe Houston will do it, because they just did it once again, Gonzaga in the tournament this year, even though it's not normally their thing. They've proven they can do it, is all I'm saying. And I just don't know. I just can't. I just think if Ross Hodge is going to try to sell, I'm going to win every game 64-62. I think there's a little concern there. That cannot be the goal. You got to try to do more on offense, and he may, but he may, because even going off of what he's always won on defense his whole career. We both said this. When you get a new job in a new environment, you need to adjust you a little bit as well. Not just your personality, but your scheme. So he's going to have to sit there and say, I believe I can win with a strong defense in this conference. There's more pressure on me with this job than the other jobs I've had. And I need a little bit maybe more on the offensive side of the ball as well. I'm sure he's not stupid. When he analyzed the great Catlett teams, Beelines and teams, and Huggins teams, I'm sure he sat there and said, great defense. Better offense than I normally put up. What am I going to bring up by the presser? All the defense. What do I know in the back of my mind? They also had a better offense than what I normally produce. I mean, bringing up one role player who did okay at you but was dumped at Michigan is not going to be enough for me. I mean, that basically was the response. So that, I think, is still a concern on the court.
Yeah. So somebody in the chat asked if we think Hoppy's question was fair, and Hoppy's question was about Darren left after 1 year. How do you, what do you say about, you being here longer than that? It's absolutely fair. First off,
100%.
I think any question that addresses the kind of main issue of the day, which that is undoubtedly the number one issue with fans right now. That's fair. And the other thing is, not every fair question is fair to who it's being asked to. So obviously, Ross, it's not fair for him to answer for how people feel about Darren's exit. But when you are taking over a program and you're becoming the face of that program, you got to answer some questions like that.
You take it on. It's the same thing as you take on Hayden Pitt. Like, you're part of it now.
So it's absolutely a fair question, and you know, on a personal level, it's not fair to Ross to have to answer for that. But that's part of the job. You know, there's a reason Hoppy's, you know, the best to do it, right?
Well, it's a fair question. Absolutely, I think it made sense to come from him, and it was an early question. I do think sometimes it matters when things are asked. The only thing that I think maybe sucks if you're Ross, which is kind of what Ren threw a little joke at of like, oh, you know, hard hitting Hoppy. I think it maybe sucks that it's the second question you get because it was right after Greg's, but. You know, again, Hoppy's been around in that market forever. He's going to ask a hard one. That's just the case. You're going to get the two guys that have been around the longest to get those first questions, and him and Greg Hunter. So you got to expect it. And the way usually questions and answers usually work, you know, he had some tough ones. He had some easier ones. He had some where he could bring up the personality. He had some that I think he had to try to, you know, maybe on the fly think, how can I answer this? There maybe are a couple that I think he squirmed around, like you brought up with my question. Maybe he didn't answer the best. That's going to be a normal press conference. That's what he's normally going to get. If that's his toughest, I mean, Cody, to be fair, would you say that for him, if you're him sitting in the chair, the two most uncomfortable questions that he probably got, and this is completely objectively, were the Hoppy question, and I guess mine, the first one I asked about why are you qualified objectively. Yeah. Would you say those are probably the two most uncomfortable ones that he got from everybody in the room?
Yeah.
So I think he did okay on those.
Yeah, and those are the two that, like I said, it's not like, and you actually, I think, said it in asking a question. You said it's not your fault the team has missed the tournament. And again, it's not his fault Darren left after 1 year. So those, I think, certainly were the two hardest questions, because they're things that aren't, you know, it's not about him. It's not about what he's done. It's about his predecessor and his predecessor's predecessor. And you know, like I said, when you're taking over a program and you're becoming the face of something, you've got to take on the responsibility for that, even though it's obviously he's had nothing to do with either one. But
no, I mean, the only thing that could have been a more uncomfortable question that I probably would have asked if we could have gone another 20 minutes is you mentioned all the great coaches of past. Obviously, one of them is that elephant in the room in Bob Huggins. There were people that even wanted him to come back and be the coach of this team. If he wants to be around the program, go to practice, speak to the team, go to games, are you welcoming him to do so? Because that's already a controversial topic. And I would have loved to hear his answer of yes, 100%, he's a Hall of Famer. Or did Ren get in his ear already and be like, yes, but we need to talk because, you know, everyone knows the situation there. So that didn't get put on him. And maybe that would have been the one that would have been maybe a little unfair because he would have been having to wrestle with, like, I got to crap on a Hall of Famer, or I got to answer this and respect my bosses because Gordon Gee's still the president and their relationship isn't great. So, like, that would have been one that I don't think it would have been fair to hit him with, but that would have been the only way to get harder than what Hoppy and myself asked. I mean, that would have been a hard one. And I honestly think, Cody, you know, this is also how, for anyone who's not in media, and I don't mean to preach as a media member, but just as like a learning thing on how this works. In the back of my mind, if there are questions that I think are going to be tough for somebody, there are many times where you go in there and think, okay, I need this asked, but I don't want it to be the first question asked. You want to get through other ones. You don't want to walk in and, you know, just hammer the hardest one and then just have the vibe suck, because then you could have a coach walk out, then he could hate you. Like, you need to know when to ask things, even in the press conference. And sometimes the environment's not right. You store it in the back of your mind. And quite frankly, Cody, what I just talked about with Huggins, I imagine we're going to get one-on-ones. I think that could be an appropriate type of question a month from now, whenever we get all these one-on-ones with the media members. If he comes on Mountaineer Report or whatever, mic drop, anything that we're doing, and you get a more intimate setting. I mean, Ren's taken a lot of hard questions on that, you know, on that setting. Neil Brown did. I think that would then be an appropriate setting. I'm sure Ren will be able to prep him weeks on end,
Yeah.
what he's going to get in those. I think at that point you can ask him more directly about what are your thoughts on Huggins. He clearly wants to still be around, and he lives in West Virginia. So, but you don't need to do it in the introductory press conference.
Yeah, I think sometimes people conflate hard questions with being mean.
Yeah, that's the Neil Brown era in particular. People wanted us to be mean.
People think, if you're not being a little bit mean, you're not asking hard questions, and that's just not what the job is. And I think you're absolutely right, Mike. I think asking him almost anything about Huggins today would have been unfair. That would have been uncalled for to put him on a spot like that, right? To say, hey, the coach from 3 years ago, what do you think about him, right? But I think in a more intimate setting where it is one-on-one, where there isn't an audience, where it's not being live streamed, where he could have space to think, I think that could be a fair question, and that's part of again, not to overinflate ourselves. That is part of interviewing. That's part of doing press conferences as a media person, is understanding time and place and setting, and also what are you going to get what's going to get a response, right? Because there's a trillion different ways you could have worded your question to be negative, to be mean, and you would not get a good response out of it. And
I included the part of this isn't your fault, because I was I was literally not trying to be a dick, but I felt like I had a question. And I also felt like, again, I felt like I had to ask it, because I even heard from people at the program, they felt I was unfairly angry about the move. And they felt like I was like the hardest on the reaction, to be honest. So I was like, okay, I'm going to walk in there as everyone working for WVU thinks I was basically a jerk about this reaction. So I'm going to, I also felt like if I didn't ask that, it would have looked almost like
you're shirking away from it. Like you're
it would have looked like, I can talk on a show and say whatever I want, but it's also different than a lot of people do that and they don't come down there. I say here and then I drive down there and I say it to his face. So it's a little different scenario, and it would have looked like I needed, to grow a pair, and maybe my bark wasn't what my bite could be if I didn't actually say it to his face. So I tried. That was what I did. I don't listening back, honestly, to critique myself. I think I could even have asked it better, but I was trying in my head, how can I ask this and not be a jerk? Because I want to have a good relationship as well. This is our first time meeting. I'm going to be covering the man in some respects. So you want to have a good vibe, and I want him to come on a one-on-one show. I don't want him to be like Duran, like, that dude, it was an ass in the over intro. Like, let's not do his show. So that's also the thing. You got to walk that line. If I would have sat there and been like, hey, Ross, remember me? Yeah, I hated the hire. Your resume was awful. Like, what's the deal? You only been a D1 coach for 2 years. Like, this is ridiculous. Then he would have, laughed at me. I would have been asked to leave. I would not be allowed to cover the program probably. And everyone virtually around would have been like, my God, I would have looked like an idiot. That's just not the way it's going to work. So fans who want that, that's just, you're not understanding the job, in all honesty. But I think he handled everything from that to Hoppies, who was even tougher, to other questions mostly well. I have heard from you say you didn't think he answered my question all that great. I will tell you, even before we're doing this show and even seeing here in the chat, I've heard from friends. I've heard from people in the comments. I'm hearing now most people think he did answer it well. So the fan perception actually is that he answered it well. So I get your criticism. I agree with you, but that's even interesting. It almost feels like that he did cross all the T's and check every box and hit everything out of the park for 99%, if not 100% of the fan base. And it really exposes who wants to just intentionally be negative if you think he didn't win the presser, because there are a few of those out there. But where does he need to go now, though, to continue collecting W's? And I mean now, because this was talked about a little bit, but this is more for a second presser vibe than an intro. Roster building, recruiting. We have a couple stories up, more coming. The cutaway, I did one-on-one with him, not best sound quality I've already heard, I know, but it's on the channel. That's more about roster building away. He did talk a little bit about Huggins, by the way, there in Beeline. So in that respect, where are you on what he needs to do from now on to keep collecting W? Because it is easier to win a press conference, even against the toughest media member with fans all over watching you, than it is to actually win recruiting, win the portal, have the pressure of winning right away, knowing your predecessor went from 9 to 19 wins, mirroring that, and then going into the fall, winning games, getting in the tournament. Clearly, you know what you got to do, and it got to be more than what DeVries did, because 19 didn't get you in the NCAA tournament. They keep bringing up Ken Palm. Ken Palm and analytics did not get this team just in. So more got to be done. And this is on him. Again, it's not his fault they've missed 2 years in a row, but if they miss 3, 4, 5, they're going to keep saying the program keep missing, Ross. You're presiding over it. You're the caretaker of this. It's not all on you, but you got to stop this bleeding. Where are you now on what he needs to do the rest of the way?
Yeah, so I think as he talked about, we enter this week, this dead week for recruiting. I think, if by the time recruiting opens back up next Friday, if the staff is mostly put together, I think that'd be a big win. He did mention he's bringing some of his North Texas guys. I don't think the program should do that slow drip that Rich Rod did, where it was.
Oh my God! I hope they do not. Please, Lord, do not.
Like, I think honestly, turn around tomorrow, say these two guys. HR takes a long time for that, so maybe not tomorrow, but maybe Monday.
But he knew he had the job for a week, and they announced it 7 days ago. So HR takes for a while, but they could have been doing it. Yeah.
So turn around either tomorrow, Friday, or on Monday, and say, here's 2-3 guys from North Texas that are coming with me, and later on in the week, say here's so and so and so and so else who's coming, and by Friday be mostly done with the staff. I think that would be really. I think that would be. You said the next step. I think that would be the next positive step to take, and then when recruiting opens back up, I think. I don't think you can wait a week past next Friday and still not have any players on the roster, right? I think you've got to get. You don't have to get your best player, right? Because it's hard. You got to get somebody, I think, just to start. And even if it's there's a handful of guys that are still on the roster from last year. I don't know if you noticed, Mike. Only one of them was there today, offering Neve.
He's like a 10-year carryover, and he didn't play last year. He took himself out. He was like, "I'll come back," and then it didn't work out clearly. Yeah.
So there's nothing like that on the roster now that would even kind of start generating. So get your staff mostly together next week, and then get somebody locked up. And I think that's a pretty good next 10 days or so.
Yeah, and I want to respond to one thing a fan said in the chat about how he did not mention Eilert and DeVries, and was that intentional? Was that a slight to them, noticeable to this fan? Here's my response. I do not think that was in any way intentionally to slight them, whether we're talking Eilert or even DeVries, who the fans would have applauded if he did throw a jab at him. What he did, which makes tons of sense, and what he should have done, no matter what the season was with Eilert or DeVries, he brought up 3 coaches on purpose. And here's why. Catlett is the winningest coach in program history. John Beilein is a Hall of Fame coach that led an Elite 8 team at WVU. Bob Huggins is a basketball Hall of Fame coach that presided over the most recent Final Four, and 3 out of 4 years in the Sweet 16, had the most success, won the last major conference title. Those are the 3 pantheon coaches in WVU basketball history. And yes, Cody, I talk about it all the time. Ren brings it up. They have the banners. Obviously, there was a coaching staff presiding over Jerry West in 1959 when they went all the way to the NCAA final game and were the runner-up. There was a coaching staff in the 60s, 70s. There was a coaching staff in 1942 over a team they now claim was a national champion for winning the NIT when that was the bigger deal than the NCAA tournament at the time, which is why they claimed that. However, the coaches that anybody knows that are Hall of Famers in a more modern era, Catlett, Beilein, and Huggins. He's not going to go through as an orator every single coach of the previous 23. He just highlighted the 3 Hall of Famers of the last 30 to 40 years. And honestly, Cody, to be fair, he could have left Catlett out because Beilein and Huggins' resumes career-wise are way better. But Catlett is the winningest coach in program history because he was there the longest, and he had a solid run. He had a Sweet 16 season, etc. So Though those were calculated, and that's the reason. It was not to slight Eilert or DeVries. I don't believe that. I do not believe he was. I mean, he's not going to name every coach that has recently been there. He picked the Hall of Famers and legends of the program for a reason.
Yeah. That's you're right on, Mike. It's he didn't bring up Josh Eilert. Right? He brought up the three best coaches in program history.
Imagine if he would have sat there and been like, "I want to talk about Eilert did a hell of a job." Everyone, what are you talking about? The worst season in program history? What are we doing here? You don't want to have that similar resume. Yeah, so like that was he wants to compare himself. Honestly, Cody, it was more PR. I think he was trying to tell you Huggins was a great defensive mind. Press Virginia tough. He's a Hall of Famer. 900+ wins, Final Four. I'm me. That's me. I'm Huggins 40 years ago. Like maybe that's what he's trying to set the table. Like I'm that tough defensive coach. Like he wants compared to those legends more than he wants anyone to keep talking about Eilert and DeVries. I'm sure.
Yeah. And somebody else, same person in the chat, brought up like he did his homework. Yeah, he did. I mean, he brought up obviously the three most notable coaches of program history. He brought up maybe Huggins' most notable moment with Deshaun Butler in the tournament.
Yeah, that was interesting. He brought that up. Yeah,
the one deep cut was probably Kevin Pittsnoggle, which he did speak very knowledgeably about the John Beilein teams and John Beilein offense. So I don't know. I mean, like he was prepared for this, obviously, right? Like that. I don't think we should be surprised by that.
Yeah. So I have an interesting thought, and it kind of backs off that, but I want to hear your thoughts on this. And this also compares the tone of the Ross Hodge presser to the Darren DeVries presser, which I wanted to get to anyway, because these are polar opposite press conferences. The DeVries press conference was coming off a really bad year in drama. It was at the Coliseum. He was a splash hire. He was known nationally. The fans were excited. He sat there, Cody. Looking back, and I watched it again. At the time, I thought it was a win. But looking back, he sat there. Now, he's not a boisterous guy in general, but his personality was toned down. He wasn't proclaiming, I'm going to go ahead and win all these titles and stack titles. He talked about the history of the program for sure, but to what the fans said, he did exactly what Ren normally does to open up these sessions. He read, and he literally said, they have, X number of NCAA tournament appearances, 31 tournament appearances, Sweet 16s, how many Elite Eights, the Final Four banners. He pointed up there at those three big banners, and those three big banners are 42, 59, and 2010. And he kind of read a history of the program, Cody. But what it sounded like to me? That he went on a Google search, not saying he's not a basketball guy, but it came off that he went on a Google search, printed out a Wikipedia, and gave it to Ren, like, is this accurate? Because Wikipedia is not always right. Ren checked it off, and then he kind of read it. His head was down, and he's 31 tournament appearances, this, how many here? Ross Hodge, he didn't say 31 tournament appearances, the number of Sweet 16s, the number of Elite Eights, the number of conference titles, which is 13, by the way. He didn't say anything about 59. He didn't mention Jerry West's name at all. He didn't mention Hot Rod Hudley. He didn't mention 42. He did mention the 2010 run, but he didn't say 2 Final Fours. He didn't do any of that. He talked more from the heart about this moment of Huggins leaning down on Butler still strikes the core with me when I watch it today. Or I want to be like those coaches because, they won, but they were tough, and it's similar to me, and I'm going to be that next guy, the next Catlett, the next Beilein, the next Huggins. So I feel like why you can be sold on Ross Hodge being more of a West Virginia guy that is more invested, that will want to stick around. And even if he gets success and then gets a phone call from somewhere else, whether it be a lateral or a better move, he may say, no, I want to keep building here, and I'm a West Virginia guy. And why you can feel that way is because he spoke from the heart. He didn't read a script. He didn't look it up on Google. He didn't read you a list of how many appearances or how many things they accomplished years ago. He just spoke of what he knew as a basketball fan, which maybe isn't going to be 100% accurate, but he followed the program. He's a basketball guy. If you know college basketball at all, you're going to, casually know at least what happened at West Virginia. You're going to know Jerry West and Bob Huggins. And that's what he brought up. Everyone know, casual fans, they know the Huggins leaning over Butler clip. It's still on the reel at the end of the NCAA tournament every year. Every year that is still played every year. So I think that's all good the way he handled it. But if you look back at DeVries, Cody, it was just him reading the list. Here's the script. Here's how many they did this. Here's how many they did that. Look at the banners there. I'm reading off a banner. Like, it didn't come off as personal as the way Ross Hodge delivered it. So I don't think he studied the history of the program. I think he knew a little bit about the program. He asked Ren for some pointers, and he spoke from the heart, which I think is better than reading Wikipedia when you're at a press conference, which is how I think Darren DeVries came off of looking back at that. I think he came off like he was reading a script.
Yeah, I rewatched Darren's presser today too. I didn't get that. I would disagree with that, Mike. I think there's something people keep bringing up, and I've talked about this on other shows other than ours even, is like people are like tying Darren's just personality to how they feel about him now, right? And there's this thing where people are like, he never talked about West Virginia, and he never talked about all this stuff, and it's like, I don't know. He never talked about anything like that, right? Like that's just not.
He said it was a special place, which now comes off like he lied a little bit, but
and that's. His answer to.
To be fair, though, he turned down Iowa and other jobs. He just took the Indiana jobs.
His
special place.
Darren's response to why West Virginia over any other opportunities, it was very much the same as what Ross Hodge said today. He brought up his family. He brought up his daughter. I rewatching it, I thought Darren came off as very personal, even though he has a much more toned down personality. I thought he came off as very, and also maybe I'm naive, right? Like,
I mean, but to be fair,
that's always a possibility. Like,
that could be fair, and that it is hard to look back on that and not put it, because as you're saying, what his response was, like, it's hard to think like he didn't lie, because if you think this is a place I don't want to ever move my family again, you just did it, sir. So like, it's hard to hear that, but maybe you're right. But I know for sure, because I did listen to it back recently, he literally read the history of the program like Ren does. And I like that Ross didn't do that. He talked about one viral clip, and these are the Hall of Fame coaches, but everyone sees the banners up there. I don't need to have that hammered home every press conference. I can look it up too. So I think that maybe came across more from the heart, whereas Darren did come across like he had a paper in front of him that said 31 tournament appearances.
Well, I mean, he did. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, but Ross didn't bring that up.
Well, Ren said that. That's how Ren opened his. So
but I would imagine that Ren said it with Darren. But if we want to
get really granular about like every sentence these guys say, like I guess, I don't know. I don't know. I guess we can.
The theme is Ross came off more from the heart to me. I know some fans felt that way. It is unfair, I guess, to compare them because you are looking back at DeVries' presser a year after the fact, but he has now left. I do get that. It is not a fair 1-to-1. I do also want to respond to this fan here. You're just not going to keep a staff. Everyone wants to keep the assistants. I think Justin Frazier's a great recruiter, but when a new coach comes in, this is the exact same thing that went on with football. People said, I want Rich Rod more than I want Neil Brown, but I want you to keep Chad Scott and Matt Moore because they are the good assistants. Blaine Stewart. He tried to keep Blaine and Chad, obviously. Matt Moore was never going to be around because he didn't want to do the Rich Rod thing, and they clearly didn't vibe if you just go to social media. But normally in every, city, university, college town, pro team, whatever, when a new coach takes over, cleans house, brings in his guys, it's all his show. If he's going down, it's his people. If he's going to win, it's going to be his people. Ren even talked about it at the Surge presser. Players and fans always want an assistant coach who's always around, but, that's not normally going to happen. That is what we talked about on this show. That was the first drop of it's not going to be Frazier. Like, he's letting you know, like, stop marrying yourself to the assistants all the time. I think Frazier's a great recruiter, and I think, honestly, he should be better off than the Virginia Tech job. I think the Virginia Tech job is a step down. I'll say that right now. I think he being the assistant at Virginia Tech and a lead recruiter there is a step down from being a lead recruiter at West Virginia basketball-wise. I do. But he was never going to stay at WVU when a new coach is coming in who does not know him. It was just realistically never going to happen.
Yeah, that guy said Illinois recruiting has gone downhill since he left. It's been 1 year. Like, come on.
Yeah, Illinois. No, he was great at Illinois, but you can't. Yeah, 1 year. He's been gone 1 year. It feels like 30, but he's been gone 1 year. It's been a long year though, Cody. It does feel like about 5. But
well, yeah, so
it was. Yeah, it's only 1 year. That's not fair to put that all the ruination of the Illinois program on him leaving. It wasn't like he was the head coach either, but he did a great job there. But but you just work. It doesn't matter who you are. You're not going to normally stay when a new staff comes aboard. I mean, there were coaches even from Eiler, like people wanted McCabe to be retained because he's so young. I think he's a great up and coming coach. It's not going to happen when a new coach comes in. DeVries didn't know who he was, so that's just the reality of this. You have a new coach. There's gonna be this. You're gonna like this staff, and if Ross loses in a few years and he gets fired, these coaches are gone too, even if you like them. So that's just the reality. But where else are you on Ross Hodge from the presser, even from what you've seen from recruiting? Because I guess one question I have, and I'd love to ask him, but we're talking about how he's a defensive guy. You need more offense. I even asked him directly, like, you've been recruiting a lot of guards, got to be more forwards, need more size. Fans are a little concerned that it's a lot of guards that we're writing about. Where's the other positions? He did talk about, well, that, he admitted that's easier to find. It's easier to find guards. There's more of them in the portal. I know I got to get forwards. I know I got to get size. I know I got to get offense. Are you concerned of what you're seeing recruiting from him? Do you think he can do more? What do you want to see? There are even people that are a little upset that he is not casting his net at Power 4 players. You don't normally get tons of them, but he is recruiting exclusively mid-majors from what we know publicly.
Yeah. I don't know. I would love, and maybe I'll do it this weekend. I would love to map out the sort of the timeline of last year's team coming together. Like, obviously Tucker was here immediately, but I'd love to map out, like, when did Javon commit, when did Sincere and Amani commit, when did Okani and Joe Yesufu commit. I would love to map that out because the reality is Darren was announced or was introduced on March 26th, and it's April 3rd, and Ross was just introduced. So that he is a week behind, and that's what my question is. Do you feel like you're behind schedule? And he said no. I think and like I said, maybe I'll do that this week, and I'll go back and kind of map that out and kind of see if they're on the right pace. But it doesn't feel like I'm not. I'm not plugged into every program's moves, but just sort of, you usually always see them. It doesn't feel like there's been a ton of there's been a ton of guys in the portal. It doesn't feel like there's been a ton of like major movement kind of guys picking programs yet. And it's certainly not going to happen. It's certainly not going to. It certainly isn't going to happen now, because of this dead period. So, so I don't know. It doesn't feel like he's behind the 8 ball.
Although now you can start getting the commits, though. The players that already been reached out to now can start committing. So that can happen during the dead. You can start seeing players that we wrote about last week now saying, I'm coming aboard. So they just can't be reached out to again. Yeah.
So I think you just no matter who it is or what it is, you just got to get the ball rolling somehow, right? And I think that's, like I said, I think put your staff together. Be quick about that as quick as you can, and then get somebody, right? Get the first guy, get the second guy, get the third guy, and let people just start being able to visualize what the team looks like. And I think that probably goes a long way.
And I think a big advantage that Darren DeVries had last year, which maybe is part of how he did recruit a solid team. He did bring in Javon Small from a power program in the conference, plucking Javon Small away from Oklahoma State, and then him being the best player on the team. Of course, that included Tucker only playing 8 games. But prior to that, when he was recruiting, and part of how he got Javon Small, Cody, it's clear. Yes. He sold him on, you can play with Tucker. Tucker's an NBA prospect. If you remember, part of why I think the fan base loved the DeVries hire, I'm sure a lot of people that love the DeVries hire, Cody, and I dug into him because we're covering it, and they've been constant searches, and they search Eilert. So, like, I was aware of him, even covering tournaments nationally. I was aware of him. But there could have been a lot of fans that were like, I like this hire because I'm hearing about it. People writing about him. He was mentioned nationally. I'm sure they didn't really follow Darren DeVries a couple years ago. Certainly not at Creighton, certainly not at Drake when he first got there. The difference is, though, he got hired. The next day, Clark Kellogg and Charles Barkley go on national TV in the middle of the tournament and say this is a slam dunk hire, not because they even just a Darren DeVries, because Tucker DeVries is an NBA player going to West Virginia. And Charles Barkley said, and again, he's a legendary player. Doesn't mean he has to be perfect and is correct all the time with analysis. But he said, this kid was, yes, at a mid-major, but he could have been at a power school earlier. He just wanted to play with his dad. And then the fans were like, wow, we're getting that guy. And then you start getting the avalanche of, okay, he's coming. And then Javon Small, oh, I want to play with him. He comes aboard. So now if you're Darren DeVries on April 3rd, Cody, here's another difference of a year ago. Not only are you a week ahead in recruiting, you're saying get the ball rolling.
Yep.
In April 3rd, 2024, Darren DeVries was sitting there a week on the job with an NBA prospect on his new team, already on the phone with a power 4 recruit in Javon Small, who would later become a contender for Big 12 Player of the Year. He had to build around them, but that's way easier to do than a whole overhaul with no star, nobody that you can sell. This is part of my concern with Ross Hodge. You cannot sell to recruits, come play for me because I'm a legendary Hall of Fame coach who's done it before. They have to say, well, I haven't seen you yet, dude, in the tournament. You can't say to them, come play with this NBA prospect because I don't have one of those yet. The recruits are going to start saying, I'll come play for you for money. And there's some at West Virginia, but there's not enough for everybody to come play for that. So that is the recruiting concern. And he does not have the built-in advantage of an NBA prospect type of son that can then help you get another player. Are you worried just simply that, yes, he can get guys, but and there's more recruiting that we don't know about, but from what is out there publicly that the media has reported on, including ourselves and even our colleagues, it's exclusively mid-major programs, some of them even the bottom tier. Would you like to see an offer to a power 4, even if you don't get him? Would you like to see that aggressiveness that DeVries did try to do a little bit, and he got Javon Small? Even if you go 1 for 4, you get the 1. We haven't yet seen that from Ross Hodge, at least for me. I would like to, in the next couple weeks after the dead period, once it starts up again and they can start recruiting, whether it be for this coming team or even for future recruiting with high school, I like to see, instead of all 3 stars, I like to see the occasional 4-star offer. I'd like to see the occasional power 4. No, you're not going to get all of them, but I like to see a little bit of that mixed in. And we haven't yet seen that from Ross Hodge.
Yeah. I think, obviously at some point you need to bring in the guy who's going to be your standout player, right? Yeah. And you need to bring in the guy who's going to be your big transfer portal win. And it's, I think we can safely assume it's going to be, there's not going to be any holdover on the roster. So it's going to be a complete turnover job. And I don't know, I don't know about the high school guys he has, committed to North Texas. If they're going to come up, I don't know, if the underclassmen on his North Texas team are going to come. But yeah, at some point you do need, you are going to need that one player to be like, maybe it's Tucker and it's this guy is a, mid-major conference first team all play or, first team all conference player, conference player of the year type guy, or it's a Javon where this guy is this guy was the number 3 option on a power 4 team and he's a all conference honorable mention and we're going to have him come in and be our stand up. But, you got to get that at some point. And you're right. The guys they've offered so far, none of those guys are that.
Not even close. And I think, I think I would rather the second or third best player on a good team gets an offer. I'm not saying you got to go for the star on those teams,
right?
But getting a Javon Small, who's the 3rd option on a power 4, would at least show me you're getting aggressive in the power 4 group. Because part of this also is, Cody, for anyone who wants to say, well, why bother if they're not going to come to WVU? I go off of what they say. Ren Baker says we're going to compete for Big 12 conference titles and national championships. And Ross Hodge talks about how you can win right away. And, that was proven. It was proven in this era. You got to show me with recruiting or something.
Yeah. I mean, even if like you're saying, even if you just offer guys, like if you're in the top,
right.
when guys do top 6 graphics,
Yeah.
if your logo's there, that's still good for you.
100%.
Even if you don't land that guy.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think another part of it is probably, once he actually gets a staff together, I'm sure we're going to see boatloads of offers going out. And,
I would think,
as opposed to the, 10 or so ish we saw in the last week. I think, once he gets his staff together, and like you said, he probably, any of the North Texas guys probably already know they're coming, so they could get started probably tomorrow. Well, no, because it's a dead period. I keep forgetting it's the dead period. So not recruiting's not yet started, but you know what I mean. Like, as soon as it's somebody other than him at whatever hotel they were staying at in Indianapolis for the NIT making phone calls, it'll pick up a little bit more. At least it should. It has to.
And what they also can do, Cody, which I'm sure they're doing during the dead period, is what they should be doing, and I guarantee they are, is he has already contacted, I'm sure he already knows the North Texas guys that are coming up. Maybe we will see announcements soon. And what I'm sure they're already doing now is we can't talk to anybody, but within ourselves, we have a spreadsheet of saying this is who we want. And the second the dead period is over, we are on the phone. Like, they don't need to have the dead period close and then get together and say, who do we want? They need to have this week be, this is the week where we have the whole, if you're a cold caller and that's your job, here's the whole list. Like, we're going to cold call, cold text, cold DM these 500 players in order of rank of, like, these are a power 4 long shot. These are a Javon Small type who's a number 3 in a power 4, but we maybe could get him. These are the mid-majors who could help us win right away. You know what I also kind of want to hear from a future Ross press conference that we're hearing a little bit from Rich Rod now, that I think Rich Rod's feeling the pressure a little bit. If you remember, Rich Rod started off with the McAfee, we're going to win national titles. It kind of tapered off a little bit of, okay, wow. Once he saw the team, this is going to be a developmental thing. Like, he started making those comments. It was getting a little Neil Brown vibe that, this might be a journey. This might be 1 year. But if you've noticed the last 2 weeks, he's flipped back and he started getting questions of, well, can you really win right away? Obviously, how do you feel about certain players? And he literally answered one question. I forget how it was asked, but he answered one question by saying, well, my assistant coaches tell me all the time, like, how do you, I can get this guy ready. How do you feel about this guy? Like, I know he can be a really good player. And Rich Rod told us, well, I turned over to that coach and said, you can get that guy to be a good player? What do you mean? 3 months or 3 years? I don't got 3 years. Like, that was what he answered, meaning I think he's starting to realize I can't go 3-8 in year one. I may need to be fair on the overhaul, but I can't. I cannot do it. They're coming off a bad 6 years. I got the brawl coming up on 9-13. I don't got to win all the games. I don't got to win the conference necessarily. I cannot go 3-8 like I did in year one 20 years ago. He said literally, I cannot go 3-8. So you're getting that now from Rich Rod. He is making it very clear. This is going to be hard. I'm doing an overhaul. I have to win quick. It can be done. We're going to try to do it. And if you tell me a player is good in 3 years, he said, I'm going to tell my assistant coaches that is not good enough. We have to win now. So who knows, even if the assistant coach will be there in 3 years, the way college sports works. So that, I think, is the next. I want to see when we get that Ross Hodge, because right now it's you can win quickly in this era. I understand you got to win now. I did even say to him, it's not on you, but you can't keep missing the tournament with this program. The fans are going to start really getting, their turn on you. They're going to start getting mad. I love if, when we do the one-on-ones or when you get to the season, when you preseason wise, get in the camp, I love to hear him then and see if you get it closer to a Rich Rod of, this player could have came here, or this player maybe could get starting minutes next year, but I got to win now. Like that sense of urgency is on Rich Rod now. I'm hearing it more from him. And I wonder when we're going to get there with Ross Hodge, because, people who think that's being unreasonable, I know there also are some that think my question was unreasonable. I think you even said it best. It is unreasonable and it's not fair to him, but it's reality.
Yeah.
It's just the case. You miss, and they're going to say the program missed 3 years in a row. They're not going to say Ross Hodge missed one of the years. They're going to say it's 3 years in a row at WVU. And you're the coach now. So all 3 years are on you, even though you didn't coach the other 2 years. And it's the same thing, we follow the Pirates. Same thing. Like,
God,
you know,
why are you gonna kill me, Mike? I don't want to think about that.
I mean, it's been a rough go. You got to do
Oh.
better than they're doing, but it's the same thing. I mean, Shelton's had his errors, but it's not like the whole, last 15 years are on him, even though the recent time is. And people put it all on him because that's just the case. The fans are angry, and we're angry, and you're angry at the Pirates right now, and that's the
Mike.
case.
This was their first off day. The first day I didn't have to think about those bums, and you're making me think about them.
Well, yeah. You got an off day, and you got to cover a West Virginia press conference, and now you're thinking of the Pirates again. So, yeah. So it can't be another West Virginia miss because then you got to experience some West Virginia miss, and the Pirates continuing to be the Pirates. So at least one of them. I think it's a better chance of Ross Hodge getting it done than. I would say it's pretty fair. You have more belief in Ross Hodge than Shelton right now.
Yeah, I mean 10,000%. Well, I mean, I think Shelton's gonna get fired.
I'm sure he's going to get fired. Yeah, I'm sure they will. And they're obviously not in year one of this. Is a different. They're more. It's almost like they're the Neil Brown, Shane Lyons of it all. If you want to compare.
My internet skipped because I started talking about the Pirates and it saved me.
Yeah, they want us to end this. Maybe that's the cue. Like, we're not going towards the Pirates. We probably should end this show. So, do you have anything else, or we will close up shop here as we recap the Ross Hodge introductory press conference? He is now the coach, like it or not. I do think I like him more now. I can be kind of more convinced on this now, even though there's a lot I need to still be sold on. I understand concerns. I think he does too. I think he handled everything well. I think they won the presser. There's nothing else more you can do in a presser. He has to start recruiting, and he knows that. But I don't think there's anything else that could have possibly been done at the presser to win any more than they did. And if you're mad about the resume, they can't fix that. So they did all they can to collect a win on this day.
Yeah. I think my last thought would be like, this is kind of done now. Like, the big news about basketball is kind of done now. It's going to be portal stuff now. Hey, let's start paying attention to this baseball team that's 24-4 and killing people.
Year one with a head coach too. Yeah,
they're at home this weekend against Utah. I don't think the weather's going to be any good, so maybe don't go out. But they're really stinking good, man. So turn all your attention to this, for the rest of the spring.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about a program that was able to turn it around, and they are competing on a national level. It was a rise. It was not a quick thing, but Saban has taken over a juggernaut, and a lot of pressure for him to get the job. I mean, if you remember that press, Renbaker admitted, I had to be convinced to do this because I wanted to go do an open market search, and he did what Maisie wanted. He gave it to Saban's, and right now he's delivering. I mean, I imagine those texts from Ren to Saban's is, great job, you're getting it done, kick ass. So more of that from them will certainly help the fan base, and that is now the benefit of you do have a year-round athletic department that is clicking. The problem is that everybody knows you're clicking athletically all across the board, from women's basketball to women's soccer to men's soccer, recent College Cup to rifle national championships again, to gymnastics, to wrestling, competing, winning a conference title last year with one of the wrestlers, and then this year competing really strong despite injuries. And then, swimming, track. You have a track star that arguably in McCabe could compare to one of the greatest athletes in program history, and what you're saying about baseball. But if you don't get men's basketball and football as an AD, it looks bad. And no one will care nationally enough to make you a success story. So everything else is fine. But if you pick up men's basketball and football now, you know what we could get 3 years from now if they start winning and men's basketball and football start winning? This will be a positive thing to end for the program. If you get football to win and if you get men's basketball to win with everything else going on, Renbaker will start sitting there. Instead of saying we're a top 25 historic program, he'll sit there and say, right now, our athletic department is top 5, top 10 in the country. That is what I think he really wants to say. You can't say it without football and men's basketball, but this is where the work to get those where the other sports are, and baseball might be freaking leading the way. At this point. So yeah, that's great to bring up. I wish we could talk about it more. It's impossible with these programs, the way the drama and the news and the constant spin. So we will see. Find our coverage of Ross Hodge. More Ross Hodge coming. WV Sports now. Cody on social, myself on social. Find Mountaineer Report everywhere you get your podcast. Download, subscribe, and also available on YouTube. So if they kind of sold me, where I was a couple of shows ago, I think it's a win for Ross Hodge. The hard work now begins.